Have you ever decided you wanted to read the Bible from start to finish and you quit? Maybe you wanted to read the Bible and you got lost or confused, or you didn't even know where to start. Reading the Bible can be kind of hard, which is why we're starting this new video series here, where we're looking over the whole story of the Bible from start to finish. Because, yeah, reading the Bible can be confusing, but I do believe that the Bible tells one whole story all the way through. And that's what we're hoping to do here. So yeah, like I said, it can be awfully confusing. I mean, the first mistake that we can make is we can look at the Bible and think it's going to read exactly like the chapter storybooks that we're used to reading. And that's an easy mistake to make, right? I mean, look, it looks exactly like a book. But if you've ever tried to read through the Bible, you've recognized it doesn't read the same way that those books do. It definitely doesn't read the same way that like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings do. That's because the Bible doesn't tell its story chapter by chapter and from the same viewpoint that those newer books that we're used to reading do. No, the Bible is more like a library or like a bookshelf. And like a library or like a bookshelf, the Bible is made of a bunch of books. And when you take all of those smaller books together, they do tell one whole big story. But like a library or like a bookshelf, all of the books in the Bible, well, they're a little different. They're not the same kinds of books. There are some that are history books. There's some that are poetry. There are letters. There are some that are just individual stories. And like those, like when we're reading different books in a library, we have to read different kinds of books differently. You're going to read a letter from your grandma differently than you would read a cookbook and differently than you would read a history textbook, right? And to add on to that, the Bible is an old book. The newest, the youngest book that is in the Bible is still almost 2,000 years old. So it's old. But also to add on to that, each of those books, they were written at different times, in different places, by different people, and even in a few different languages. If we read through books now and we read them from different authors, we realize that different authors give us different flavors. Different time periods sound different. The way that people think and the way that people write and speak change over time. So when we look at the Bible, we need to look at it just a little differently than we look at books that we read that were written a couple of years ago. Okay, so to help us see that, to see the whole story of the Bible, we're going to have to use glasses and sunglasses as an example. When you put on sunglasses, it changes the way the whole world looks, right? And different sunglasses have different tints to them. My sunglasses have kind of a grayish blue tint to them, and my wife's have kind of a grayish purple tint. When she wears hers, everything looks slightly purple, and when I wear mine, everything looks slightly blue. These ones are even polarized, which if you like to fish, you know it helps you see through and past the reflections that are on the water to see what's underneath. It's fish. So we can use different lenses when we read the Bible. And when we put different lenses on, we'll notice different things. The first one, it might seem kind of obvious, but it's the lens of seeing that what happened earlier affects what happens later. So for example, the first 5 books of the Bible are called the Torah or the Pentateuch. And those first 5 books were the Bible for Israel for a long, long time. That's going to affect what later writers are going to write that ended up in the Bible. And because those first 5 books happened first, well, it's going to tint what happens later. Similarly, the Old Testament was done being written before the New Testament was even started. So stuff that happened in the Old Testament is going to be referenced, referred to. It's going to color what's going on in the New Testament. If we're not familiar with what happened in the Old, we're going to miss some things in the New. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples. In the book of Psalms, which is a whole collection of songs and prayers, Asaph, the guy who wrote Psalm 81, says this: I heard an unknown voice say, I removed the burden from their shoulders. Their hands were set free from the basket. In your distress, you called and I rescued you. I answered you out of a thundercloud. I tested you at the waters of Meribah. Hear me, my people, and I will warn you. If you would only listen to me, Israel. You shall have no foreign god among you. You shall not worship any god other than me. I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth and I will fill it. So if we haven't read the book of Exodus, we don't know what Asaph is talking about when he's talking about the thundercloud being brought out of Egypt, or what in the world Meribah is. But when we know the story of what happened and what Asaph is referring to, we see that God's showing us that he's faithful even when his people aren't. Or take this New Testament example. Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. So if we haven't read 1 Kings, we don't know who Elijah is, what he did, or why he's important. But we also miss the point that James is making here. When we know the story, we can see that point, and we can also see just how connected the entire Bible is. So as we can see, all of the books of the Bible build on one another. Now the other set of helpful lenses that we can use are the Jesus lenses. And that's the lens of seeing that everything in the Bible points to Jesus. The Old Testament starts out really broad. It starts with all of creation, and then it narrows down to people, and then to a family, and then to a tribe, all leading us forward and pointing us forward to one person. That's Jesus. Jesus is the center of it all. And then from Jesus, it starts to go out from that one person to that one tribe, out to everyone, and then to all of creation, always pointing back to Jesus. Okay, so that can all seem like a lot, right? Well, let me give you 2 questions to ask yourself as you read the Bible that kind of helps distill it down. First, ask yourself, what do I know about what happened before that's important to what I'm reading now? And also, what does this show me about Jesus? Now, as we go through the whole story of the Bible, I'm going to try to point out both of those questions to help us think through both of them, to kind of help you as you learn to read the Bible more and more on your own. All right, and there's another thing that we need to talk about. As we look at the Bible together, I have some assumptions. The first of those assumptions is that I believe that the Bible is Scripture. What that means is I believe that God had a hand in making the Bible happen. Yeah, God used people. He used different authors from different places with different viewpoints to reveal who he is to us. But I also believe what Paul says in 2 Timothy, that all Scripture is God-breathed. So God has his fingerprints, his breath all over it. Another way of saying this is, I believe that everything that is in the Bible is exactly what God wanted us to have. Which leads me to another assumption. I do believe that there is a God, and that God is the one revealed to us in the Bible. More specifically, I believe that he is the Christian triune God. So yes, I 100% believe that Jesus is God and that everything in the Bible points to him. Another assumption I have is that God is the main character of the Bible. Much more than people are. And that colors the way that I read the Bible. The Bible shows us who God is much more than it's an instruction manual on how we should live. Finally, I'm assuming that this whole video series is meant to help us as we read the Bible. It's definitely not a substitute for reading the Bible itself. God shows us who he is most specifically through the Bible. So if we want to get to know God better, we should turn there first. Alright, so next time we'll begin right at the very beginning of the story, right on page 1 of the Bible. I look forward to seeing you then.